I don't know. Say it with me. I don't know. Good God, it is liberating. I am a towering mountain of ignorance. I don't know. We're taught to believe that everything has a reason. Now, I'm glad that we have the desire to understand the world. That results in all sorts of great stuff. We want to know everything. We're humans. We're curious. And maybe it's our culture. Maybe it's just humanity. But I think a lot of the time we end up mixing up thinking something with knowing something. Suddenly, I know that I don't know. But somehow everyone else seems to know. They all know differently from each other, but they all seem to know. What I'm saying is nobody's opinions are correct in the world. And yet it's impossible not to tie your opinions to your concept of self. And often people tie those things so closely together that they begin defending their guesses as if they're defending their very lives. In a way, they are. This is why it can be so impossible to talk about certain topics with certain people. They've tied those suppositions to themselves so tightly with knots of narrative and constructed reality and values that there's just no untying it. And maybe unsurprisingly, in those situations, the best course of action is just to be friends. The world as we perceive it, as we've built it inside of ourselves, is a lie that we tell to ourselves, not out of deception, but out of necessity. We simply cannot understand the world as it is, and so we construct. But sometimes I just have to tell myself the thing that is definitely true, the truest thing I can say, which is that I don't know.
This is the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast with Bob Pondillo and Cass Midgley.
Yeah, that's one of the hardest things for me, even in deconversion, to kind of go back and experience is just the randomness of life. There is no broader narrative. So if something really, really good happens and then something really, really bad happens, they're not connected necessarily. Nope. There's no karma to say, well, dadgum, that's what happened. It's just life, and life is random, and life can be chaotic. And that's a hard thing to process sometimes whenever you're so used to having this idea of, being blessed or being cursed, or these very dichotomous ways of working.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 199 of the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast. I'm Cass Midgley. Today, Bob Pondillo and I converse with Daniel. Daniel's a teacher, a coach of a robotics team, an overall computer nerd. He grew up in a small suburb of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and attended a Southern Baptist church until he transitioned to a charismatic non-denominational church in high school, where he met his wife of 16 years when he was 21. They now have 2 daughters, 2 cats, and 1 bearded dragon. He has a bachelor's in English and Social Studies education from Southeastern Louisiana University and obtained a master's degree from Louisiana State in Higher Education Administration. Daniel's ability to think critically led him out of Christianity. It's also helped him as a teacher and coach to develop critical thinking skills in his students. The fact that Daniel is a robotics coach is apropos, because from a young age, his approach to his faith was mostly cerebral, more brain and less heart. So when his faith eventually unraveled, it was not as traumatic as it is for those whose hearts are truly in it. I'm not saying he wasn't devout. In fact, he was militant in his devotion to the gospel, prayer, worship, advancing the kingdom on earth. And yet he had a relatively soft landing after jettisoning Christianity. In this conversation, Daniel describes his desire to be in God's inner circle. He wanted more than just casual Christianity. His high school experience with Christianity, borrowed military jargon, assembled and marched down the halls in prayer, waved the Christian flag, and blew the shofar, shod in matching fatigues and combat boots. Spurred on by music like Audio Adrenaline, DC Talk, and Caedmon's Call, he sought the face of God and the power of the Holy Spirit. You remember that song, More Love, More Power? Power seems to be what modern evangelicals want more than love. Power is addictive. Like Daniel, I too wanted a Christianity that was powerful. I personally attended a lot of conferences to be with the people who were serious, to ascend the hill of the Lord with others who desperately wanted God to show up and establish his kingdom on earth as in heaven. We wanted Jesus to be Lord of all, even politics if necessary. Jesus and God were so good at running things, we wanted them to run everything. And it's what they wanted to do. But they were gentlemen and thus needed an invitation, and for righteous behavior to increase. So abortions and homosexuality were keeping good things from coming to America. A commonly quoted scripture was 2 Chronicles 7:14, which placed the focus on God's people repenting rather than those not considered to be God's people. Quote, "If my people, who are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land." Unquote. There are pockets of Christianity today that focus on themselves getting right with God as a means to achieving God's favor on the earth. They see themselves as a remnant, like Lot's family in Sodom and Gomorrah, that would stay God's wrathful hand from destroying the nation. I used to believe that our worship was a pleasing aroma to God, like a burning cow. It was a sacrifice of praise, and it counteracted the stench of sin rising up in God's nostrils. We were saving people from God's wrath by worshiping. After all, He looked for people to stand in the gap and fend Him off, and that was me. About 50 years ago, there began a shift in Christian thinking. They decided that praying in your closet wasn't getting the job done, that minding their own business within the four walls of the church wasn't being true ambassadors for Christ. Perhaps they felt that remaining the sweet, loving, insular community was a form of being ashamed of Jesus before humankind, for which Jesus threatened to be ashamed of them before His Father in heaven. So they began their campaign to be salt and light in the public square. They formed a powerful voting bloc, upon whom corporations capitalized. Fox News hijacked what little agency they had left after decades of Bible worship. They now fill our senates, congresses, and courthouses. George W. Bush prayed for direction on major decisions. Wisdom, science, and scholarship are disparaged. Both the church that looks within and the church that tries to be politically powerful, they're both trying to revive God. They're both trying to get God to do something, to be like He was in the Bible, doing signs and wonders and talking to people and miracles. They're both asking, where is God? Maybe not in those words, but in their hearts, they want God to move on America. And they're looking under every rock to get Him to move. So God's people have looked within, searched their own hearts, repented, prayed longer, fasted, worshipped more passionately, beat their breasts harder to get God to move. Another pocket of Christianity has blamed all the sinners, the gays, the baby killing. This is why God is angry. This is why He doesn't do signs and wonders. Everyone's trying to solve the problem of God's silence. And we ex-Christians were too when we believed. How many times did we notice that life was happening exactly as it would if there were no God, and then commenced to perform theological gymnastics to make excuses for His absence? We've heard that a lot in the 4 years we've been interviewing ex-Christians. Quote, "I stopped making excuses for God," unquote. Believers for centuries have pulled Jesus down off the cross, propped Him up, carried Him around like a corpse in the movie Weekend at Bernie's. We've even tried CPR on Him, for years in fact. 1, 2, 3, breathe. 1, 2, 3, breathe. Over and over again for decades. We've pressed the shock paddles on His chest, yelling, "Clear!" and zapped Him over and over again. It's like Bob always says on this show, "Come on, it's been 2,000 years. He's not coming back." Some of us have pulled the plug, taken Him off the ventilator, walked away, lost and confused, wondering, what the fuck did I just spend the last 20 years doing? It was a lie so big and so repeated by so many people over so many centuries, of which countless cathedrals have been erected and billions of dollars have been spent, that we believed it, and millions still do. Even now, some of our nearest and dearest still believe it and actually want us to return to it, to pick up the silent God again, drag Him into every aspect of our lives, crown Him Lord of Lords and President of Presidents. I think we're witnessing the type of chaos and absurdity that hoisting up a hollow-shelled corpse into leadership produces. It's the same reason why our universe is chaotic and absurd, because no one's watching the shop. It's just us here. We're the only hope for solving our problems, taking care of our world, our societies, and each other. Imaginary gods have distracted us for too long. We're the ones in need of resuscitation. We taped this conversation on April 7th, 2018.
We interview people you don't know about a subject no one wants to talk about. We hope to encourage people in the process of deconstructing their faith and help curb the loneliness that accompanies it. We think the world is a better place when more people live by sight, not by faith. Please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts.
Also, we offer these podcasts freely, and your support truly makes a difference. You can support us monetarily in two easy ways. You can pledge a monthly donation through Patreon. That's patreon.com/EA podcast. Or you can leave a lump sum donation through PayPal at our website, everyone'sagnostic.com. Our opening monologue is an excerpt from a YouTube by Hank Green titled Towering Mountain of Ignorance. The music behind it is Never Know by Jack Johnson. The segue music on this episode is One Love by Danny E.B. Tracks on YouTube. Thank you for listening, and be a yes-sayer to what is. Okay, so Daniel, are you going by your full name?
So when I've been asked, I had to talk to my wife about all this. So
of course,
avoiding using last names, mainly for her sake because of her business and such. And then I won't be using my kid's name. I'll just call them my kids, my girls.
Sure.
So other than that, my name's fine. I really wouldn't care less otherwise.
Okay, so just Daniel is fine.
Yeah, just Daniel's fine.
Sure, gotcha. So where are you now? Where's the where are you calling from?
Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Baton Rouge.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you've been to Mardi Gras?
I have never gone to New Orleans Mardi Gras. And that may be part of the story in some ways, because that's one of the things that you did not do as a Protestant Christian here, really. Not if you're evangelical, especially.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I guess too much sex or too much beads something.
Too much everything. Too much sex, drinking, drugs, you name it is here.
Yeah.
So we've been to the local Mardi Gras parades. Those are a bit more tame. Taking the girls to a couple of those, but the Mardi Gras New Orleans at the time, no. And honestly, I just haven't had a chance to go since I've decided, hey, what the hell. So at some point. Although I will say, amusingly enough, I took my family to Disney World last week when we were in Universal Studios, and apparently it was Mardi Gras month at Universal. So they had a big Mardi Gras parade in Universal Studios, which I was a bit odded out by.
Yeah.
Huh, strange.
I told there's a British couple behind me, and I said, this is not what Mardi Gras looks like. This is just kind of like, look at all the pretty floats. No one's taking off their shirt or anything. This is no fun.
Yeah. So it's a cleaned up version of Mardi Gras.
Oh, yeah. We have, in Baton Rouge, they have one called, let's see here. I'm trying to think of the name of it. But there's a parade here that's largely run by the LGBT community.
Oh.
And that's an interesting parade. I haven't got to go to it yet either, but I'm next year, my hope is to get there.
Gotcha.
Well, let's go back and talk about your religious upbringing.
Yeah.
Sure. So I was raised Southern Baptist for most of my kid life until I was around 16 years old. My mom was more of the one going to church. My dad was kind of in the background. He worked plant work, and so he was always working night shifts, dog shifts. And so a lot of what we did was, me and my sister and my mom. And so she worked on Wednesday nights as the cook, or one of the cooks for Wednesday night church service. The Southern Baptist churches here, they always have Wednesday night dinner. And so they would go cook, and I'd be up there with her for sometimes from 8 o'clock in the morning, all the way through till church was over around, 8 or 9 at night. Jeez. And then sometimes she also sang in the choir, so I was there later depending. So, I kind of spent a lot of time in church. The difference was that my mom was an academic most of her life. She was going to college while we were kids, and then she has her PhD now, so she started getting her undergrad after we were born. And so it was in school pretty much all the way through our lives.
Wow. What does she have her PhD in?
English.
English, okay. Gotcha.
So she's one of those. She got her undergrad and decided, hey, this was fun. Let's do the master's degree. And then she's like, hey, this was fun, and went on and do for her PhD.
That's good. Did she ever teach college, or did she?
Yeah, she actually taught at LSU. She taught in Texas, and now she makes her living doing a very hard job of teaching with 3 online universities while she drinks her coffee in front of her TV.
Well, that's great.
It's a hard life.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, I know your mom said, in fact, based on the bio that you sent, when you had to do what was it called? The Christian, where you say
Sinner's Prayer.
Sinner's Prayer, yeah.
Sinner's Prayer, yeah.
Yeah, she was saying things like, are you sure you want to do that? You know?
Are you sure you know what you're doing?
Yeah.
I can remember I probably started asking her about it when I was in kindergarten.
Wow.
Probably that, maybe even younger. From what she says, I was always kind of that bent to where I'd ask a lot of the deep questions about things. And since that was kind of my worldview in my life, those are the questions that I would ask, a lot about spirituality and faith, even as young as 2 or 3 years old. When I started talking, I started asking questions. And so when I got to be around 6 years old, she finally said, look, let's go talk to the children's pastor. And I can remember going into his office, and he was talking to me about, what do you know about salvation? What do you know about Jesus? And I remember, I don't know why this sticks in my head, but one of the distinct questions was, that she pointed to a picture on the wall of course, Jesus, the white virgin. And he said, do you know who this guy is? And I said, well, it's supposed to be Jesus. And he said, is that what Jesus really looks like? I said, no, of course not. That's just a picture somebody painted. And for whatever reason, that convinced him I was of sound mind enough to lead me through the sinner's prayer, which is kind of amusing in a way.
Yeah.
I've always found it interesting that the first prayer you pray is guided. Like the first communication you make with God is this thing where they say, okay, repeat after me. Mm-hmm. And so they say something, you say something back, they say it. And by the end of it, well, there you go, you're magically saved. Which has always been kind of odd to me. And maybe that's part of where I started on my journey. I never liked being led along by anyone else. And so even with, religion and Christianity, most of my time was spent learning myself what I believed.
Yeah.
I love the church I went to. The pastor that we had at the time was a pretty good guy. He, I can't remember where he had his PhD from, but he was, had his doctorate degree from a non-seminary school, and he was a brilliant guy. He's one of those guys that he could talk for hours. And so, where a lot of kids would spend their time going to children's church, I spent a lot of my time choosing to go to the adult service. But from then on, a lot of it was just me exploring and learning about what I believed. I got really into like end time stuff pretty young. Probably by the time I was in 4th grade, I was already really into that. Our church didn't really teach on it. Our church didn't really hammer anything major. One of the things that our church was kind of interesting is that I don't remember like hearing about hell and damnation until I was older.
Yeah.
Probably maybe even middle school, really, before it started hitting that I can recollect remembering those things. And so when I got saved, I didn't get saved for that reason at all. I got saved because it was part of what you did, and I wanted to be part of the community more than anything.
Well, all these churches are shaped by the leadership. And you got a denomination that maybe in general emphasizes heaven and hell. But whatever pastor is at whatever church, it's going to be shaped by his personality.
Oh, sure.
And sounds like this guy was learned, and, it just... It does surprise me that you went to a Baptist church that really didn't talk about hell that much, but that's a indication, or of the pastor's de-emphasis on it, and that's his prerogative.
Well, our church was always, it's kind of an interesting story. Our church was always more progressive in some ways.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Whenever we were kids, and I don't remember the story personally, but this is coming from my mom. We've had 2 pastors at that church that I was with. The one that right before I got saved, and the one kind of afterwards. And the one that got there right beforehand, we still had a policy in the church where blacks weren't allowed in the church.
What?
Yeah,
Wow.
That was still a thing. It was unspoken, but it was a thing. And the pastor realized this. He found out about it when he was there, and so he went up to his 2nd or 3rd sermon on a Sunday. He goes up to the pulpit and he says, "Okay, according to our bylaws, in order to have a business meeting to make decisions in the church, we need to have at least this many people present." And he looks around at the audience and he says, "Okay, there's that many people present, so I'm calling a business meeting." And he said, "I've been told that currently our policy is not to allow black people to attend our church. And I really don't think that's a good idea. I think that's horrible. So all in favor of eliminating this, say aye." Of course, the entire congregation says aye. I don't think I heard, they would have heard any nays at the time. And all opposed, of course, nobody. So they passed this new thing through. And afterwards, my mom said that one of the deacons got up to the microphone and quietly whispered, or quietly said, "There's going to be a deacons meeting after service." That was kind of the push and pull back of our church. We had
Yeah.
the progressive pastors and the much more concreted in deacons.
Yeah.
Right. So
And that was
did it happen? I mean, were black people then permitted into the church?
Oh, yeah, they were definitely permitted. I grew up in a community. Louisiana is a very strange place. A lot of people, look at Louisiana and go, man, they must be really racist people because of all the different things that have happened over time. But the opposite's actually true. We are so integrated, both by force, by law, because of our schools, and also just because of where we live, that we all deal with so many different types of people. I'm a teacher, and the school that I teach at is, I think, 60-40 at the ratio of black to white. But we're in a largely white suburban community. And that was kind of the way it was in the area that I lived in Baton Rouge as a kid. The community was mostly white at the time. And so you may have one or two come in that were black, or any other ethnic origin. But in general, it was all white people. It's just the place you lived at the time. But you can go right across the street, into the next community over, and you would find churches that had zero white people going to them whatsoever.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So you've got an inquiring mind, and you're a thinker, and you're energetic, and you want the truth. And when I read your bio, I related to it in this sense that I was raised Presbyterian, and then I kind of migrated over to Baptist because they had a better youth program, and I could play drums in the service and things like that. But the progression was Presbyterians didn't emphasize hell, Baptists did. Then that church split into, charismatic, speaking in tongues and such, which I felt the emotions and the theatrics of it were exciting. So I went that route. But along in your journey, you meet a young man who's your peer, at least chronologically, and he's kind of one of those guys that had a bad past, but he got saved, and now he's radically saved, and
Right.
And you kind of latched on to that, and I had a very similar experience. I mean, talk about that, Daniel.
Sure. So when I got into middle school, I attended private school for up through elementary, but I was transferred out of that when I got into the gifted and talented program here, and that involved going into public school systems. And so when I got into the public school system with a much larger pond, I guess, I was one of those unfortunate middle school kids who was a bit awkward. And so I got bullied a whole lot through most of my middle school experience. I was still very much in the whole Christian thing, trying to get, See You at the Pole started at the school and a lot of things like that, which had a lot of kickback.
You know what that
which
is,
was, of
Bob?
course,
No. What is it called again?
See You at the Pole.
See you at the pole, at the flagpole.
Yeah.
Oh, so
Yeah.
for church, for like saying a prayer or something,
Yeah.
right?
Once a year. Public schools try to do it, and
Okay.
Yeah,
I didn't know.
Yeah, and that's kind of the way that my life went through schools, trying to instigate these larger scale things. I remember, I'll get to the friend in a minute, but
Yeah.
I remember a lot of what my life involved was digging into the Christian stuff because I really couldn't find friends in the public school sector. So a lot of what I did was based on, church community, but also, online community. I was into computers since I was 2 or 3 years old. My dad's first computer that he had for us was the one that plugged into the television, and you had to write basic programming to use anything. So we were always on. So when the internet came out, or I guess the precursor, I was on Prodigy.net, or Prodigy at the time. I don't know if you've ever heard of that one.
No.
Okay, so it was one of the original internet things. Instead of web browsing, you got on and you had chat rooms and bulletin boards, and so I started a Christian club there, and a couple of hundred people joined that, and that was one of those ways for me to escape. So when I got into high school and I had transferred briefly out of the public school system back into a private school to try to get away from the whole bullying situation. But I just didn't like the small school environment. So when I got to high school, I moved back into the public school system. I was kind of a shy kid. I didn't talk a lot to many people. I was sitting down in the bleachers at the gym one day, and I was reading my Bible, and this long-haired, with the Jinko jeans, so these really wide-legged, flared jeans. He had a chain on his wallet. It's one of those 90s freak kids for sure. Walks up to me, and he says, "I really like your shirt." And I'm wearing a Christian shirt at the time, and I look down at my shirt, and I look up at him, and I'm like, the most random thing for somebody to say to me, especially him. And so we got to talking, and I guess that started up a best friendship for the next 4 years.
Yeah.
He was running a cell group, and so I went to the cell group, and holy crap, there they are speaking in tongues, and swaying back and forth and praying for a really long time.
Tell me the cell. What is a cell group? It sounds like a communist thing.
It's kind of like they call them life groups now.
Oh, okay, all right. I see what you mean. So
probably because it did sound a lot like a communist group.
Home church.
Yeah,
home churches. He had started his own, and so he's a 10th grade kid acting as a pastor to other 10th and 11th and 12th grade kids, which is always fun. You could imagine some of the doctrinal teachings that we got from that.
Right. Dude, I totally relate to both of you because you were starting Christian clubs and Bible studies in the school and see you at the pole. You're a mover and a shaker. You said something about one of the reasons you enjoyed starting these clubs where hundreds of kids would get involved was as an escape.
I wouldn't call it an escape, but more a community.
But you did call it an escape.
Oh, did I? Okay, so maybe I did. I don't know.
Was it from the bullying or like just?
An escape from having to deal so much with these kids that I never felt like I'd connected with.
Yeah.
I would find ways, and this is one of those things, I realized looking back, I would find ways, though, at points in time to be persecuted.
Wow.
You'd find things to stand against that were stupid at the time to stand against looking back. But things like, there was a card game called Magic the Gathering.
Sure.
It's a lot like Dungeons and Dragons, right? And they of course, had kids playing it, and they had cards like the Pentagram of Power. And, I was the kid that would go, man, no, I can't play that because, and I would go off in my own tangent of scripture and such. And, of course, this didn't help with the bullying by any means.
Yeah. So when you say bullying, do they, like give you a swirly or something, or push you around, or knock you,
Most of it was non-physical. It was a lot more verbal. But what's weird about it as a kid, especially middle school, you have to find somebody to hang out with. Otherwise, you're just kind of sitting along in the corner. But the people that I would hang out with would also say the same stuff. Mm-hmm. And so you really never had quote unquote friends that you would have like be close friends to.
Okay.
And just for whatever reason, I guess I just attracted that lot. Yeah. And so it was, it very seldom turned violent or anything like that. I think I got a wedgie once. and actually when that happened, I got one. It was a guy he was like in 8th grade when I was in 6th or something like that. So maybe a year older. So, he was one of those guys that just kind of stood up to people a lot. And so he kind of I saw him as, I don't want to say a protector, but maybe that may be the right word. Just a kid who tended to try to stop those things from happening. Well, I guess peer pressure got the best of him, and I was in the locker room one day, after the horrible PE experience, because I was never good at PE at the time. And he came up behind me and gave me this wedgie, and for whatever reason, that kid had done it, broke me.
Yeah.
And I walked straight out of there. This is the first time I would have really gone against authority in some ways. I didn't even talk to the teacher. I just walked straight out of the gym, walked straight to the office, said I was sick, needed to call somebody, and got my grandmother to pick me up, and I never went back.
Okay.
I stayed out of school for the next 4 months. Psychologist said it was probably better for me. So,
Yeah, but that's a deep betrayal.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
It sounds like you and I had a sign on our back.
Kick me hard.
Well, there's just for some reason we attracted bullies.
You were probably very verbal.
Well, and that's what I wasn't an introvert. I was a show off.
And so is Daniel. He's very verbal. So you say something, and then people go, shut up, you.
Well, and you mentioned that you were flirting a lot, and I flirted from kindergarten on. I got mononucleosis in kindergarten.
Really? Yeah. From kissing girls.
From kissing girls.
I will say that I was not very verbal as a young kid. I can remember distinctly the shift in my personality where I went from being what I perceived as introverted, and where I was shy and I didn't talk to a lot of people, and I was relatively shy around girls. My first girlfriend, quote unquote, I didn't get until 6th grade. If you don't count the 2nd or 3rd grade experience of the girl chasing me around the playground and trying to make out with me.
Doesn't count.
You don't count those things. But in 6th grade, I remember, and I asked her out by writing a letter. Do you like me? Circle yes or no, that type of thing.
Sure.
But I can remember, and when I met Tyler, who is the guy's name that was my best friend, he brought me out of that shell in high school a good bit because we wanted to start this new club called the Christian High School Movement. And it didn't exist because what we saw is we would look around the campus and they had FCS, Fellowship of Christian Students, FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and all they really did was they ate pizza and they said a prayer and they went back about their lives. And at the time, we were listening to DC Talk and we're listening to Audio Adrenaline and we're listening to all these bands because the Christian movement of music in the 90s was just amazing at the time.
Yeah, right. Sure.
Caedmon's Call and all those people. And we were like, what are we doing just going into a classroom and praying and eating our pizza? And so we decided to start our own club. And we made it. I remember we sat down under a light pole at his house at night and wrote out a full charter for this club, me, him, and another friend. And it was probably about a 30-page long charter about what we could do and could not do. And it was random stuff. Things like, well, we're going to follow school rules to the letter, because if we're not following school rules, we're not being an example. So we wouldn't chew gum in school because that was breaking a school rule. Whenever if teachers would put on a movie and it had any cursing whatsoever in it, we would stand up, explain to the teacher that we didn't believe in that, and we would walk out of the classroom, go to the library. And we got permission from the principal to do that. And so we very quickly became this large, very easily seen group of kids. And, it was very great. I guess at the time it was good because it channeled our rebellion in a way that was not destructive necessarily.
Yeah.
But we spent a lot of times, our uniform, we had a uniform. We wore fatigues. What were they called? They were the urban fatigues, the black and white looking fatigues. We had boots, and we had a beret, and we had like this black Christian t-shirt. And once every week we'd wear this thing. Every year when school started, for those the 3 years I was part of it and we were part of the club, we would start the school year off going around the school on the inside with the Christian flag in one hand, and he had a shofar, which is the ram's horn, and he would blow that, and we'd pray around the entire school. I mean, we're pretty wild.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was hilarious.
I had never heard of anything like this in my life. So you're dressed like in this military.
Yeah.
Well, you're
camouflage,
but I mean, you're the, what do you call them? The children of the
army of the Lord.
Army of the Lord.
Army
right.
of the Lord. Oh no, exactly. And that's kind of what we portrayed. And we would go outside every morning and we'd have prayer. And what's funny is the time is, so we'd start the prayer, and because he was one of the guys that everybody knew. He wasn't a kind of a cast-off. He was very popular, and even with his long hair and his freaky self. Everybody liked him. And so people tended to gravitate towards the club. And we ended up with, 45, 50 people at times that would come out in the morning and we'd pray. And of course we're praying in tongues and all these things like that. And you have a lot of these Baptist kids coming out. And it was kind of an interesting experience. And around that time is when I moved from being Southern Baptist. I stayed in the Southern Baptist Church for a while. And then I remember I had a group of my peers, high school kids, brought me into one of the rooms in the gym of the church, on a Sunday, and they really said, what do you think you're doing about this whole, praying in tongues thing? And, basically I had an intervention. And so they intervened in my behalf to try to get me to stop this, what they viewed as devil speak, I guess.
Wow.
Or just over the top.
Oh, yeah. Well, not just over the top, because Southern Baptists definitely do not believe in the gifts of the Spirit. Right. As a way of speaking in tongues.
Well, who does then? So that's
Charismatic.
Charismatic evangelicals.
Charismatic.
Yeah, okay.
Pentecostals.
Okay, I got you. All right.
And there's a lot of that kickback back and forth between the Southern Baptist churches, especially here, and I don't know about other places, but against Southern Baptist churches and the non-denominational Pentecostal churches of the area. And so neither the two would meet. I remember our youth service in the Baptist church started getting a lot more open as time went on. And the pastor of the church, the one that I had been sitting under for a while, had also kind of things gotten more liberal in the church, and it got to the point where they were both removed from the church.
Ooh,
they stepped
both
over.
Who? The pastor and the youth pastor.
The youth pastor. They were politely shown the door. I should say that. They resigned and moved on to bigger and better things.
Yeah.
But when that happened, I went ahead and said, okay, I can't stay here any longer, and I moved to a Charismatic church, and really that kind of started my next phase, I guess, of Christian development.
Yeah.
Going in, having pizza, saying a brief prayer, not enough.
No.
Whamsy pamsy. That was lukewarm. And there's this impulsion and compulsion in the scriptures exemplified by various heroes of the faith where God said, there's a man after my own heart. And there's bravery. There's I think if there were Asteroth Poles in the Old Testament, and the people of God just tolerated those Asteroth Poles, can't remember who it was, whether it was Gideon or somebody came along and said, "Not on my watch," and tore them down. And this is the desire to be faithful to the. Jesus died on a cross. That's the degree in which he devoted his life to me.
Right.
And so the cause and effect is I want to be as devoted to him as he is to me, and be proud. I want God to be proud of me.
Right. What is an Asteroth pole, anyway?
Asteroth is a goddess, ancient goddess.
Oh, I see. So they would put up these false idols.
They're kind of totems to her, in a tribute to her.
And that's a bad thing.
Well, that's a brazen image, or that's a whatever. Yeah. But I know that in your testimony, Daniel, that in your bio, there was something that you got from being a leader, being out front, instigating, and maybe being visible.
Well, I think what I enjoyed most about that was the idea that I was doing something that God would be proud of.
Yeah.
And because one of the things that we're taught, even from a young age in the Christian circles, are that you're really nothing. Nothing that you do is good enough. Because you can't earn salvation. So if you've got 1 million people saved or one person saved, you're still basically slime.
It's filthy rags.
Filthy rags. It's nothing. And so I never really accepted that as something that I liked as part of my doctrine. I understood it and I worked through it, but I consistently tried to do things to make God proud. And part of that was, it had a lot to do with wanting to be involved in the inner circles. Like, that's kind of what I always wanted to do, be involved in like the hidden knowledge, those things that only certain people got. Because that's one of those things that's, also in Scripture, to those who understand, to those who believe that we're given this. And these people over here, they're not given to understand so they can understand it. And so a lot of what I did when I was younger was try to pursue that. And, if that meant, praying every day in my bedroom, with music playing and going for hours on end, well, that's what I was going to do, because I wanted to hear the voice of God. And that's one of those things that I never really did.
Wow.
I wasn't very good at gaming myself when it came to stuff like that. Like, some people I think are very good at gaming, hearing quote unquote the voice of God, like in their head or whatever they do. It's like, because I've always been curious about this, because I've never had a point where I can say that I've heard in my Christian life God speak or God spoke to me.
Yeah.
I never had that experience.
Yeah, me too.
It was always through experiences. If I did something and it worked out really well, and hey, God must have been in that.
Yeah.
If it blew up in my face, well, damn, that was not the right way to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, gotcha.
Well, I think we can say that no one has ever heard God, and the ones that claim to are gaming themselves. I mean, that's your point. You weren't good at that.
Sure.
I was.
You heard God?
I guess in hindsight, I'm going to have to admit that I gamed myself. But
what did he sound like?
Well, it's never audible, but it's just this. For me, I would just open my mind in prayer.
Yeah.
And then the thoughts that would come in, that would be God. Typically, yeah. Not understanding the neuro firings of synapses and stuff in the human brain, but yeah. Anyway.
Okay. I think as kids, we have invisible friends, and if we really talk to ourselves enough, if we go back and look at it, our invisible friends will sometimes say things that we didn't make them say consciously.
Right.
And so you can have a conversation with yourself. Yeah. And I did that a lot through middle school when I was getting bullied. Like, I would have, internal conversations, and it would get to the point where I would be talking back and forth with me, and I would say things that would surprise myself.
Yeah.
And there's actually a whole movement online, and I should stop real quick and say I've always been involved in like really metaphysical stuff. So even while I was a Christian, I still pursued really kind of out there things, astral projection and that type of stuff. I was really like lucid dreaming. Tarot cards are actually a new thing for me. I got interested in them because of New Orleans. And so I kind of, whenever I got over the whole idea of hell and damnation, it got really easy to start exploring new stuff.
Yeah.
But that stuff still fascinates me. Like, these things that have been in existence for a long time, like, why do people get involved in it, and how does that work? And so as a kid, especially, that was kind of my thing.
Well, do you think, Daniel, that those who are sort of predisposed to, thinking about God and that type of magical stuff, that are, they're more predisposed to than this other magical thinking, which is like, Ouija boards and all that stuff, that, magic things. And it is interesting, and it's also taboo. So there's another reason why, you'd want to be kind of interested.
Oh, sure. There's a combination.
Things.
I think that there are some Christians who are definitely locked down to it. So they would say, no, not at all. They didn't even touch with the 21.5 foot pole. But for those of us who are more like, we enjoy the kind of spiritual aspects of it, then I guess there's always that taboo thing. And one of the ways you feel that, and one of the ways I filled it, was starting to go to a charismatic church. Because then you start seeing some really interesting things happen.
I think what Bob's implying, and I think it's true, is that the same drive
Right.
in a believer, in a Christian, to want to touch the divine, want to know that there's something bigger than me, or there's something that's going on that transcends.
Yeah, something occult. Something's happening.
But I think it's the same drive that makes somebody want to believe in tarot cards.
Yeah.
Knowing the hidden.
Knowing the hidden.
Right. I have a sister-in-law like that who's very much a Catholic, but really gets into ghosts and demons and those kind of, bizarre kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same thing, really. It's a continuum of the same thing, like you said. But
that's my experience, is that the people that I've known that are, and hell, we might be talking about you, Daniel.
I'm okay with that, too.
Yeah, the people that I've known that are, I roll my eyes when somebody starts saying, I believe that I was a tailor in another life.
In a previous life,
yeah.
Right, that kind of stuff.
And they kind of get off on that. And there's something about these grander narratives that stimulate this type of people.
And they are compelling. I get that. And they're great ideas for movies and, for that kind of stuff.
Documentaries about haunted houses.
Yeah, those kind of things.
And even my son, who's a pretty dark skeptic about everything, he's very scientific. Yeah. He got pulled into those ghost
stories,
documentaries, and he was like, "No, Dad, it's real." And I'm like, "Oh shit, what happened to my son?"
Yeah, I know,
but you've been drawn to those things, Daniel.
Yeah, for a long time. And the good thing is that there are things out there that are not overboard. The ghosts and things like that, where you have to look. There are things that are more mental in experience. That I enjoy. I said Astral Projection was one of those things, and that's more of the brain entrainment and sleeping and things like that. A lot like Lucid Dreaming. And so there are those things that can appeal without being way out there. Yeah. And I think that's part of what, as a kid especially, I really got into. And part of that was being able to control the environment around me. Because one of the things about like Lucid Dreaming and Astral Projection and all that stuff is it really comes down to having control of something that you normally wouldn't have control of, or tarot cards. It's having at least a glimpse into the present or the future in a way that you normally wouldn't. So it gives you a sense of control.
Rather than seeing it as just random or a narrative that you're making up and those kind of things. Yeah, I get it. Sure.
Well, what is
I'll be honest. Yeah. That's one of the hardest things for me, even in deconversion, to kind of go back and experience is just the randomness of life. There is no broader narrative. So if something really, really good happens and then something really, really bad happens, they're not connected necessarily. Nope. There's no karma to say, well, dadgum, that's what happened. It's just life, and life is random, and life can be chaotic. And that's a hard thing to process sometimes whenever you're so used to having this idea of, being blessed or being cursed, or these very dichotomous ways of working.
Yeah, so that master narrative that keeps everything cool, keep everything in place. Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
So I don't really know what astral projection is. You want to give us an elevator version?
It's a lot like dreaming, except for you're conscious when you're dreaming. There's two different things. There's lucid dreaming, which is where you realize that you're dreaming in the middle of a dream, and then you can control it. And so you take conscious control of your dream state.
That would be awesome.
Oh, yeah. And it's an interesting thing to try. And, there's been a lot of research and studies on it. And there are people who do it naturally.
Yeah.
People who just recognize, if you've ever recognized in a dream, hey, this is kind of weird, I must be dreaming. Yeah. That's kind of the idea of lucid dreaming. And what lucid dreaming does is it starts you asking questions on a natural basis. Hey, am I dreaming? So you'll go throughout your day and you do things, what they call dream checks. And you'll stop every hour or so and go, hey, am I actually dreaming right now? And you'll do something weird, like try to fly or something stupid. But what happens is if you do it enough, then eventually when you're dreaming, you'll actually do the same thing. And you'll go, oh, holy shit, I'm actually dreaming. You'll realize that you're dreaming, and then you can take control of the dream. Astral projection is one step, I guess, above that. And it's where instead of going to sleep and recognizing you're dreaming, you stay conscious while your body goes to sleep. You have like everything. You have the really hooky, spooky side of it that's much more, into the, like I said, the tarot cards and the ghosts. And then you have the other side, which is much more scientific and looking at, the idea of being conscious within dreams. And there's been a lot of studies done on, how does learning in the dream state work? So if somebody's lucid dreaming, can they learn things easier because they're dealing with different portions of the brain. So
yeah, I recall a long time ago, I took maybe in the 80s or 70s or something, I took a dream class, whatever, Sonoy dream something or other. And it is possible to say that if you practice, that thing, that scary creature, that monster that's coming for you in your dream, you can say, stop, be something that I can relate to. And you turn it into a dog or something. You turn it, you know what I mean?
Right. And that's a very rudimentary form of lucid dreaming. And so that stuff always, fascinated me. And so, that's part of the reason I think that I locked in with the Charismatic church so strongly, because a lot of that random stuff would happen when you're talking about exorcisms and being slain in the spirit. And so the church that I went to after the Baptist church was a non-denominational Charismatic church. And I really never locked in with the pastor of the church. Good guy, but he was never somebody personality-wise that I locked in with. But I did lock in very strongly with the youth pastor. And I think I may have described him before as kind of a cult of personality. He was one of those people that, and he didn't do this on purpose. And I always like to say this in the beginning, like if there's ever a guy that's sincere in what he believes and what he does, and he cares about people and all these things, this is this guy. But just his nature, especially at the time, was more militant. It was very much like taking the Christian club that we started and putting it into a church youth group. And so we would have church, Sunday mornings, Sunday night cell groups, which would last until 10 or 11 at night. You'd have, Wednesday night services, and then we had this Friday night service called IOU, Inreach, Outreach, Upreach. And, this is all youth group things. So we'd get together and we'd play pool and whatever for like the first hour and a half, 2 hours. Well, right around 9 o'clock, we would start a worship service that wouldn't end until midnight. Wow. And this is all kids. And so when we get a lot of youth together in one area, you can imagine the environment that's created when you have the music and, you have a guy who's very good at that whole prophetic thing. And so he'll read people's mail, quote unquote, which is one of the big things that we always like to see happen. And
what does that mean?
So
make stuff up?
He tried. It was what is it when you're reading? It's
cold reading. It was cold read.
Cold reading.
And he could do it very, very well. And of course, to him, it's hearing the voice of God. I don't think he was doing it as a charlatan by any means, but to him, he was hearing the voice of God, and he would pick people out and say, you're dealing with this and this and this in your life, and they would break down into tears, and that's exactly what they were dealing with. And I'm sitting in the back here going, holy shit.
Well, this is cool, they're 12 stuff, or 15. Of course they're going to go through the same thing. Yeah, but exactly. I get it. Okay, I see.
And so he was very much that cult of personality, and he was also one of those guys that you'd have different circles, unmeaningly, but it just kind of happened this way, to where you'd have the kind of the outside group of the youth group that would come in, they would do their thing, and they would be there on services and stuff like that. And then you have your youth leaders. That was a collection of kids who decided they want to do more. And so, you have to go through a youth leadership class, and you're the ones that help at camps. And we had 3 camps a year, a spring mini camp, summer camp, and then a fall mini camp. Wow. And those things were just crazy because I have to be honest, and maybe this is terrible of me. I'm actually the coach of a robotics team at the school that I teach at. And there's a lot of dealing and working with kids that I learned by being involved in youth group.
Is that right? Cass is shaking his head. Maybe he did some cold readings. I don't know.
I sure did, yeah.
Did you really?
Oh, yeah.
So you could just...
Well, I'll be honest with you. Daniel, you are describing me. And I'm not saying that I was the cult of personality, but that what I relate to most is these intense meetings that go late into the night. Mm-hmm. And I call it now like rub the lamp until the genie showed up. We worshipped so earnest and so hard and so passionate with tears and our hands raised and laying prostrate and just craving the presence of God and et cetera, et cetera. But then I started a group. My youth group grew to about 100 kids in a real small rural Oklahoma town. And so I started a group, and they were the inner core. Mm-hmm. I called it entheos, which is Greek for enthusiastic, which is, not Greek for enthusiasm, it's Greek for God within.
That's a great name for one, too.
Yeah, and Daniel, guess how many students I allowed in?
How many? Probably, what?
12. Come on.
Of course.
Yeah, I should have thought that. Well, see, for me, it wasn't 12. So we had the youth leaders, and then eventually the youth pastor. We had those of us who were kind of really heavily involved, on the worship team, because I was part of the worship team by the time I got to be around 17 or 18. I've always been a musician. Getting over myself and getting where I wasn't shy anymore and I was more extroverted. I started playing the drums, and so I played the drums on the worship team. Then eventually I got to the keys later on in life. But he taught.
Yeah, you're my brother.
This is
of a
Cass.
different
Yeah,
mother.
The more I hear about this is hilarious. So he brought in like 7 or 8 of us guys. Of course, there were no girls involved in this because that would be weird.
I had both. I was progressive.
You had
Well,
girls.
with the youth, when I was with the youth leaders, there were both guys and girls, and the advisors. This was the inner core.
Okay.
We didn't have a name. We just met in his office on Friday nights before the actual service started and talked about really, really deep things. He was a guy that got involved in a lot of the fatherhood ministry style. I don't know if you've heard of a guy named Hanby, which is his last name. And it was a movement. The idea that you have not many fathers.
Yeah.
Is the term from Scripture. You have not many fathers. So the idea was that you'd have a father over the ministry, and then you'd have sons underneath that father. And the job of the father was to mentor and disciple these sons.
Yep.
And so he brought in, 6 or 7 of us, and we became kind of that father-son ministry. And it was beneficial in some ways because he was very practical. As much as he was very spiritual, he was also very practical. So we'd ask him advice like, should we do this? And he's like, no, you shouldn't do that. I remember I wanted to go. Do you remember there's a ministry by Ron Luce called Teen Mania?
Yep.
Okay. So they had Acquire the Fire every year in Baton Rouge or in New Orleans. We'd go to that. And I was convinced when I graduated high school, I wanted to go to this Teen Mania year-long internship thing. And he looked at me and he said, you're not going to get a graduate certificate from this. You're not going to get anything from going to it other than working for somebody for free. You're basically paying them to work for them. It's a dumb idea.
Yeah.
And so he was very practical in that route. And so in a lot of ways, the advice he would give, he was supplemented with spiritual. So you'd have all the spiritual advice that's out there. He was the one that would give, prophetic words all the time. But when you sit down in his office and say, I want to do this thing or that thing, he would be pretty much upfront and say, no, that's a bad idea because of these reasons. And they were very practical. But anyway, so, I would sat in that group with him for a number of years. And at the same time this was going on, the youth group was getting bigger than the adult church.
Yep.
And you had people coming from the adult church starting to go to the youth services because they're more entertaining and more.
I totally did that.
Right.
Totally did that. People started coming, and they eventually asked me to start a church because the name of the youth ministry was High Impact. And people came and they said, we want a high impact for adults. Kid you not.
Wow.
Yep, and that's kind of what happened. And unfortunately, eventually, after a number of years, and we were all, for us, by this time I was in my 20s. I had gotten married at 21. We were still involved in the youth group. Once you get married, you evolve from being a youth leader, and now you're a youth advisor because you're too old to be in the youth group. In this case, the youth group was all the way through college age. They had a college age ministry, but it kind of combined together in the services. And so, I was a youth advisor by this time, and there was a lot of underground rumbling about how the front church was trying to hold the back church, the youth ministry back, and they weren't letting us do it. And so this militant, this again, the same thing about military, about, fighting the good fight, about being the ones that were the set apart. Yeah. Maybe that's the best.
Wow.
Being that. That was what I really dug into, and a lot of my friends were the same way. And by this time, what's interesting is my friend Tyler that I made through high school, he had left the church, and he had gone on his own way. He was going into the military, and so it's kind of me and a whole new group of friends. But that's what we did. We were very much involved in this. We're different people. We're set apart. We're going to do these things differently. We go to the camps, and so eventually, there was an issue with money. With who people were tithing to. Were they tithing to the church or were they tithing to the youth ministry? Basically, somebody was threatened to be kicked out of the service. They said, if you're not going to tithe to the front of the church, if you're tithing to the youth ministry, well, then we're going to ask you to leave the church. The youth pastor said, well, if that's going to be the way it is, then I'm leaving with them because I'm not going to turn my back on somebody who's choosing to support, the youth ministry. So that's whenever he left to start his own church. And of course, whenever we got told that, we were like, oh yeah, we're going to go out and do the amazing things. And I think, honestly, if I had to go back and say this was the first nail in the coffin of my belief, this is the situation that caused it. Because
you're untethered when you leave the church. You're
not because of that, because we still had the church. Now, he left, and we followed. I remember, we went back in the youth room when I found out that we were leaving, because he called me the day before, said, look, this is what's going down. We still went to church on Sunday morning because we wanted to hear what the pastor was going to say. Because by this time, we had developed this, us versus them mentality. Yep. The youth ministry versus the adult ministry. And the adult ministry was trying to hold the youth ministry back. And what we wanted to do was really what God wanted. And it's funny because this is how church splits happen.
Yeah.
You start thinking that you're better than the rest of them because you have this secret knowledge and you know how to work it.
Wow.
And so I remember we went into the youth room and we started pulling off like paintings off the wall that we had there and taking things that we considered to be ours, because we were leaving. We're going somewhere new. And I was convinced that when we were going to leave, we weren't going to even start another church. Because by this time, I had become convinced that why we meet in the four walls anyway? Why are we doing this? Why are we meeting in a church building? And so we all leave. And the first thing that happens is we start meeting in like school cafeterias or places like that because we had no place to meet in. And the first thing that occurred that kind of caused the rift was the end of the core group. Like he never met with us again as a group, me and the guys. And he started focusing on the adults that were there that had come along with us. Mm-hmm. Suddenly we were too young. Mm. Mm. And then of course we bought a building, or we started renting a building. We started having traditional church services again, where you go in and they had adults there. And so the really big excitement, the really, praying in tongues, a ton, and where there's always the prophetic stuff going at the end of service and all these big bombastic things started to pull back.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. And it may have been because of the nature of the group that was there now, because you had a lot of adults that were there.
Yeah.
And they just didn't get as involved.
It's very typical for any form of rebellion to become what it hates,
Yes. Yes, for sure.
Yeah,
sure.
Daniel, I wrote down things like rebellion and anger, go to the camps, us versus them, teen mania, acquire the fire. All those words are, these are, you're like
intense
and angry and, those kind of things.
That's what you're supposed to be. For God, you're supposed to be intense.
Is that why some of these Christians behave this way today? Adults,
yeah. There's no bigger thumb than God's thumb in your back.
Oh, yeah?
No. Like you want it.
Very angry. Okay.
Well, let me address this for a second.
Huh.
Mm-hmm.
What environment in American culture fosters this kind of subculture politics, and where a charismatic guy can put together a group of people,
impressionable young kids? Actually.
Yeah. I guess maybe the robotics department. You can have some kids that are more intense about their passion for robotics than others. This is a theme, but there's something secretive, and especially when so the word holy in the Greek it means set apart, and so Daniel's talking about wanting to be set apart.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm just remembering. I can completely relate to every freaking word of this. In fact, the youth group was growing faster than the church. My youth group, where I was the pastor.
Yeah.
And at one point, I wanted to have, what was his name? Charlie Hall. Did you ever hear of Charlie Hall, the worship leader? Yep. All right. Yeah. So what was it called? One festival or
the one day?
Yeah, one day. And these
I've
were
been to one.
Yeah. And Charlie Hall was an Oklahoma City guy, and he was a worship leader, and he'd become world famous. And I talked to Charlie, and I said, I want to have a worship service. In our little town, there was this big dance hall, a big country western dance hall, and huge, like a giant Morton building, warehouse type thing, with a giant dance floor and hundreds of tables and seats and bars and stuff.
Yeah.
And it was kind of the way our church and the way the religious people in town viewed that bar was the place of debauchery. Mm. It was a stench in God's nostrils. It was something that its presence was keeping the favor of God from really shining on our city. So it's a blemish. Well, I wanted to take the land. I wanted to take that building for Jesus. And I wanted to plant a flag. Here again, some military terms.
Sure.
So I asked Charlie Hall to come and lead a worship service in that building and get as many people from all over the county, mostly youth, to come to that building. Well, the pastor I was serving under at the time said, no, I'm not going to allow it. Guess what I did? I said, yeah, I'm going to do it anyway.
Right.
And that was a rift, and that was a split, and that's when I was kind of shown the door. Mm-hmm. And the ministry that I started after that exploded even bigger.
Wow.
And I became the ministry became a renowned thing in a five cities, 5 surrounding cities. Kids would come. They'd block off the street of this youth house because there was hundreds of kids that were coming from all over the place. And anyway, so I relate to all of this, but I'm just saying, in what environment would a guy like me, charismatic and egomaniacal, be able to do this with the full endorsement of the community? Like, he's a man of God. Our kids need this.
Well, and it's interesting. As much as denominationalism has caused a lot of crazy things to go on, at least when like Southern Baptists or these denominations, if somebody starts getting too far out there or too much authority, they tend to come and lock down pretty quick.
Yeah, the headquarters, they're accountable to the denomination, whereas non-denom, nope.
Right, you're open. You can do whatever you pretty much want to.
There were people that called my ministry a cult, and I used to just say, no, you don't understand. We're not a cult. We're out in the open. We're not hiding anything. Come and sit in on it. And, our doors
ours was called a cult, too, for a long time.
Yeah,
it was one of those.
And
but
now,
you don't feel like it is.
No, you don't feel like it is, but now looking back, they were right. It was a cult.
Right.
Wow.
And even if you're doing things, I will say, and part of it, when I moved church, when we, separated out and went to this new church, we didn't grow that fast, nor did we really didn't grow at all, to be honest. And I think part of the reason was our pastor he'd been a youth pastor for his entire career and generally worked only youth pastor jobs. That's what he did. He was paid by the church. Well, when you start your own church, if you're starting off small, he eventually had to get another job to support himself. And so he became the CEO of the Chamber of Commerce of the city that we're in, just kind of random happenstance. And I think being involved, when you finally get out of the one circle of being in church and you start getting involved with all these other people and having to deal with them and, run these events. He had to run the Mardi Gras event as a CEO, and he had to do all these different things. His message began to tame a bit, and he became more on the idea of grace in his message. And when that happened, a lot of the big crazy stuff started to die down because it's really hard to preach grace and then go, fire and brimstone, that was his thing. And so, and so for me, that kind of started to inundate my life as well. And I think that's where we kind of slowed down. And, my wife still goes to that church from time to time, and it's kind of the same number of people that are there. It's very family-like. You go there and there's like 20, 30 people, and that's about it.
The one led by the youth pastor?
Yeah, the one led by the youth pastor. And so he mellowed. And of course, when he split off, he was already in his 40s. And so he was a youth pastor for 20 some odd years. And so, which doesn't happen very often. Wow. A lot of times, that the energy to be a youth pastor kind of leaves at some point.
Well, let's move into your you just mentioned your wife still goes to church.
Sure.
I guess, how long have you been, you consider yourself a non-Christian?
I will say officially for 2 years or so. Okay. I think I got to the point earlier than that. When I was 25 or 26, I started reading some things online about ultimate reconciliationism or Christian universalism, the idea there is no hell, that everybody gets it eventually, that, no matter who you are, whether you believe whatever religion, when you die, you'll go, oh, look, there's Jesus. Dadgummit, I was wrong. And then through whatever process, everybody goes to heaven.
Yeah.
To me, this was kind of whenever you remove the teeth from the monster, it's a lot easier to deal with the monster. And honestly, it's a lot easier to see the monster is not really there at all.
Yeah.
And the idea that I couldn't question, you could only question certain limits. And after that, it would be, you're risking hellfire. Hell.
Yeah.
So there's this idea that whenever I begin to read on this and go, well, the Bible doesn't really make it clear that hell is eternal at all. There is no, if you start looking at the Greek and the Hebrew, like Old Testament didn't have an idea of hell anyway.
Right.
Not until Daniel did you see anything that was mentioned about anything to do with hell. The Psalms, they always translated the grave as hell, but that wasn't a good idea anyway because it was the grave. And if you read in the New Testament, most of the words that they use for eternal could also mean for an undefined age.
Yeah.
So the word is aeonios in the Greek, and it means both eternity and as defined to an age. It means two completely opposite things. And so I started looking at all this and going, something smells fishy here. Because on the one hand, God says that, he draws all men unto salvation. And you look at the word draw, and it literally means to drag all men to salvation. You look at all these words and you go, okay, so how is God victorious if he's only saving a percentage of the population?
Yeah.
Makes no sense. Eventually I got to the point where I was, I declared myself, I guess, as an ultimate reconciliationist, as a Christian universalist. And the strangest thing was that the pastor of the church, the same guy, said, okay, cool. Don't actively teach it in the church, but, I'd like to hear more about it. And you can talk to our, the elders of the church about it. I'd like to know where you came to these conclusions. And so he kind of gave me enough lead to hang myself, I guess, in some way.
Yeah.
I kind of got to the idea, this is the way that I was able to get around the idea that God, you fucked things up in the first place. It's kind of your job to fix it.
Yeah.
And well, now you're saying, well, there's, it's by grace that you're saved, but yet we have to accept the grace to be saved by grace. Doesn't make any sense.
Well, he'd be violating your free will and taking your freedom. That's how they spin it.
Sure, but there's nothing in the Bible that ever talks about that. That's all extra doctrine. One of the things that I realized, through that time is the amount of extra doctrine that we throw in. It's kind of like what I really started hitting people with is there's no such thing as an age of accountability in the Scripture.
Mm-hmm, no.
So your little baby that got cancer and died, I'm sorry, they're going to hell.
Yeah.
I mean, if you really want to get down to brass tacks, what's
Right.
in the Bible, that's what exists.
Yep.
And so that, for me, started the downhill or uphill climb, I guess, out of the cloud of belief.
Yeah. When you have a God that's created by man, and then it's going to be so flawed that you have to jump through a million hoops just to make that God look good and try to, justify all of it, like the salvation of some people, the rejection of others, the sheep and the goats. And how's God going to come out of this looking even slightly moral or kind, loving?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, then you start talking about the way that certain Christians do other Christians, and the idea that, like, the Mormons or the Jehovah's Witness, are they Christian or are they not? I mean, they believe in Jesus, but then they have their extra books. So, it just didn't fit. And
whoa.
Well, the Tyler in my life was a guy I latched onto, and he was a year older, and he was charismatic, and he was a musician. We ended up starting a band together, Christian band, of course. And but when we got to college, he came to me and he said, "I'm not a believer anymore." And he said, because of Romans 9. And let me just read a section of it. It says, "Rebekah's children were conceived at the same time by our father Isaac, yet before the twins were born, or had done anything good or bad, in order that God's purpose in election might stand, not by works, but by him who calls, she, Rebekah, was told, the older will serve the younger, just as it is written, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. What then shall we say? Is God unjust?" See, even Paul feels that. Like he's saying, I know what you're going to say. This is not fair. Not at all. For he says to Moses, "I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I'll have compassion on whom I have compassion." It does not, therefore, depend on human desire or effort, but on God's mercy.
Oh, okay.
So it's God choosing and then pre-choosing before Jacob or Esau were born. He'd already decided their fates. It's fatalism.
Yeah.
So it's just a lot of mess.
So all this stuff about free will, that's extra biblical. There's nothing in
Sure.
there, right?
Yeah.
Arminianism versus Calvinism and all these things.
Right. Yeah.
They just don't work. And I think, when I go back and I look over at some of the scriptures lately, I go, I've met Paul before. Like, I've met Christians that are Paul, that what they do is they read these scriptures and they try to make things work. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I can kind of imagine a guy, whatever type of guy that was, is writing these things down, doing the same exact stuff. You find all these Christian books and go to the Christian bookstore, whatever. And what it's really people doing is a lot of it's trying to jump through hoops. Figure out, okay, how could I twist God to make sense whenever there's nothing to make sense? Yeah. It's like when my kids tell me a lie. They lie to me, and then I realize the lie, and so they have to make a different lie to try to fill the hole that's left by the. And before you're done, I'm trying not to laugh because it's just gotten so funny with what they've had to come up with to make it work.
Yeah, it's just one giant lie. In your bio, Dan, you call yourself an agnostic atheist. Now, there's two words sort of representing concepts sort of at odds with each other. So, or are they in the way you think of them? Agnostic is I don't know, atheist is no God. So which is it,
Well, for me, it's I do not believe there's a God. However, if one were to knock on my door, I wouldn't be like, nah, sorry, man, don't believe in you. So that's kind of where I stand at it. Like, I may find out, like I guess we all might find out one day in the sweet by and by that, oh, holy shit, we were wrong. And damn, it was the Buddhist God. And they don't have any gods. So this is problematic. We could figure that out. And so right now where I'm at, I don't believe there's a God. Actually, I had what was it? There might be a teacup or a tea kettle out in space circling the sun that we can't detect.
Yeah.
Well, I'm kind of that way. I don't see any relevance of God in my life because he's not there to make himself known. Yeah. So in that case, I'm an atheist. I do not believe there's a God. However, I'm agnostic in the idea that I have no clue, really. I mean, none of us do until the very, very end and go, okay, well, shit, we were wrong or we were right.
Yeah. I always say, hey, it's been 2,000 years. Fuck it. It's, cut it out with the agnostic. It's not going to happen. It's going to be 2373 and they're still waiting for Jesus to come back. He ain't coming back.
Well, what you're saying, though, is you're saying you're an atheist when it comes to Jesus.
Oh, yeah. I do not think that the Christian God, there's too much incompatibility.
Right.
For that God to be there. However, might there be some upper design that we don't know about? I mean, people argue whether the universe is a hologram. What the fuck do I know? So,
well, let me address this, because this is where Bob and we were sitting on the porch, and I said, he asked me what do you think he means by agnostic atheist? I said, it just means humble. It just means
a humble atheist.
And Bob, you sit here on the show and you espouse almost every week the scientific method.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that you praise it is it leaves open correction.
Yes.
Room for correction. Agnosticism is a scientific method when it comes to God. It's saying, I don't know, but right now, the gods that have been proposed, because these are truth claims. Christianity is a truth claim. Right. Islam is a truth claim. Those are the two main, and they're making a truth claim. And to that, I say no. I'm an atheist to those gods. Clear cut.
Okay.
But there could be a prime mover of which no one is making a truth claim. No one's even saying it because it's ineffable.
Yeah.
And you're just saying, what I think Daniel's saying is that if new evidence came forth, I would renege my atheism.
Okay. Yeah. No, me too.
Yeah,
I get you. All right.
Yeah,
fine.
and I think
I'm for all that then.
Well, I think it's worth clarifying.
It makes sense.
I do think that's one of those interesting things about the scientific method and science as a whole is that the thing I like about science the most is that we recognize our ignorance, not that we recognize our knowledge, that we go, there's so much stuff that we do not know.
Yeah, that's what drives the scientist, Yeah,
and I love it. That's the stuff that fascinates me. So, everything from quantum, physics on down. I'm what you would almost call a polymath. I love learning about a ton of different things because it all fascinates me.
Mm-hmm. I meant to ask this when we were talking about it. Have you ever actually done astral projection?
Briefly. The problem with astral projection is it involves a lot of focus, almost like meditation, because you have to let your body fall asleep, essentially. I move around too much. Like my brain is firing on all cylinders 99% of the time. But I do know people that have had it happen or have experienced it. And, it's one of those just odd quirks of the brain. There's a lot of, things when it comes to our brain that we just don't understand yet. If you want to take a rabbit trail, Google search one day, because it takes forever to talk about. There's something called tulpas, TULPAs. The idea of creating people working to actively create a secondary consciousness from their primary. So the idea of an invisible friend that talks to you separate from what you would assume that it would say. Does that make sense?
Kind of.
And in other words, it's how do people hear the voice of God? And you go, well, how does that work? Well, in some way, you create it in your head. And eventually, if you believe it enough, it takes on a life of its own.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, if you can have people with multiple personalities, then it's very easy to have people that are hearing voices in their head that are saying things that go, oh, well, that doesn't make any sense. Because that's one of the things that especially our pastor would say all the time is, well, this is not something that I would think by myself. And I'm like, well, you say that, but all the material is there. They say every dream that you have is made up of material that you've already seen. But I mean, let's face it, how much input have we taken in over our entire lives?
Yeah. Neuroscience, though, that is a huge field, just burgeoning now. We're learning more and more about the human brain and why we behave the way we do.
Is it the final frontier?
Maybe. Might be.
So for us, it might be when the robots rise up and take us all.
There you go.
That's right, and you're starting that.
I say this is why I'm a robotics coach, so that whenever our robotics overlords rise up, I can be like, look, I helped you guys. Just leave me alone.
That's right.
I'm here
Don't
for
hurt
you.
me. Yeah.
Sarah Connor.
That's right.
There you go.
Well, another on this supernatural stuff, and then we'll move on, is we had a guest on a few weeks, maybe a month back, by the name of Mary, and she talked about self-hypnosis. Have you ever studied any of that, Daniel?
Oh, especially when I was younger, middle school, high school, I got into a lot of hypnosis. I would try to hypnotize my poor sister all the time to try to make this work. And, and that stuff was another fascinating aspect. And to me, that was good because it was involving the mind, nothing that was spiritual in nature. So I could kind of navigate around it. I never really did the Ouija boards because that kind of stepped over the line for me as a kid. I always and even tarot cards and stuff like that. Anything that involved communicating with something outside of myself, I didn't do because that was an open gateway.
Yeah.
Holy hell.
That portal.
Invite the demons in for a party. And that's one of those things that I didn't want to do. But, it's funny. I think that's part of the problem that we have in like, I guess, the charismatic circles and things like that. When you look at trying to convince people this stuff is not true, is it could so very easily mask itself as being truth in the mystical. Because I've seen a lot of really, really weird stuff because I like to find things that are weird. They have I'll bring one up that y'all may or may not have heard about, the gold dust movement. Have you heard of this? The golden glory.
Well, is this where gold dust falls from the sky during a worship service?
Yes, that stuff.
Yeah, I've heard people say that.
Yeah. I mean, there's just a lot of weird things. You go, okay, I don't know how they're doing it exactly. And that makes my life much more difficult when it comes to convincing people that no, this is not really what's going on.
They put glitter in the air conditioner vents.
Air conditioner vents. Oh, yeah, of course. That's one way of doing it. I thought about that as a joke anyway. I have a couple of, now that I had this even before I deconverted, but there's some really good jokes that I would like to play on churches of people. Mainly because just give me a couple of trucks with really big speakers during a good Southern Baptist worship service. We surround the church and you blow a really loud trumpet and you just let go some helium-filled blow-up dolls into the air. And you just see what happens when they leave the church.
So they might think that the second coming has happened.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Wow.
That's one of the things about Christianity that's always amused me, how seriously they take themselves because it is such a serious thing for them. But there's so much oddness that goes on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, that's my main regret, is I took it way too serious. I was one of those people. Had I just been a Christian light, I would not be traumatized, and having to still recover to this day from the shit that I gave myself to wholeheartedly.
I think for me, talk about agency and things, it's kind of interesting. I didn't have much of a testimony as a Christian because for most, what the testimony involves is the idea that you were something.
Drug addict.
You found Jesus and then you were something better. For me, I was always in Christianity. And then my deconversion hasn't really been that tumultuous. I still have a lot of the friends that I had at the church that I went to. We don't hang out, but largely that's because we're in different environments now. I'm never there. But I still talk to them on Facebook and things like that. I've had a couple of them try to call me out and have discussion, but it's always very cordial. I don't deal with a lot of that backlash that I hear, and when I'm listening to your podcast, that I hear a lot of people go through. And so in some ways, it's kind of weird for me because I don't have those big stories of having to deal with a lot of that stuff. And I think part of that is, when it comes to agency and things like that, I've always questioned to the limit. Like I would find that line where I go, okay, can I go any farther? And at one point, I had an atheist friend who was he had 5 degrees and one of those guys that just can talk you forever. And he said, "What is your central pillar in your faith? Like the thing that if this fell, the rest of the house of cards would fall." And it was one of those things that I thought about a lot. And I think I came to the conclusion at the time was that it was the idea of Christ crucified. And so as long as that didn't fall, everything else was questionable. The idea that the Bible was, sola scriptura, whether you speak in tongues or not, prophecy, hell, heaven. Unfortunately, I reached the point probably about 3 or 4 years ago where that central pillar was yanked out from underneath me.
How did that happen?
Are you a mythicist?
What do you mean?
That Jesus never existed. He's just the, culmination of other historical figures.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think I'm at that point of going, I really can't figure that out. There's no way of saying overall. So I'm just going to be like, if he was a guy, he was a guy. But there's a lot of guys that get promoted. I mean, let's think of people, Columbus Day and go, yeah, Christopher Columbus, that great guy, right? So, anybody can be blown up to mythic proportions given enough time.
Yeah, we do that with the deceased a lot. We do it with our own loved ones.
Yeah.
Right.
My mom speaks so highly of my dad, who died 35 years ago. She made him a saint in her imagination, so it's very common.
Oh, yeah, and I think that's kind of where I stand. For me, the idea of the cross became pointless. And when that happened, then there was no need for it.
Substitutionary atonement. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just why would the whole statement, I can't go over it in my head, but the idea that God would create a problem that he would have to create a solution to fix that involved killing his own son. I mean, that by itself just doesn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And once that pillar fell, I tried to hold on to the idea of God, and because I was still in church at the time, and I was still playing on the worship team at the time. And I remember when I would lead worship, I really started bringing out. Pulling out songs that were dedicated to the cross. I try to go more like, God is love focused. That was my next step. Right. Right. And I think overall, part of my problem was I got done with the idea of a God that can never be proud of the creation that he made.
Mm.
Yeah. And so, because I used to write, I wrote worship music every now and again. And one of the songs that I wrote probably a couple of years ago was the idea that, God is great, God is good, and he's proud of the things that we do, which defies the idea of Christianity that he's really not. Like anything that we do is filthy rags.
Yeah, and when he flooded the earth, he regretted ever having made man.
Exactly. And so if somebody told me, hey, here's your dad, and no matter what you do, he's never going to be proud of you. Now, he'll be proud of your elder brother, and because he's proud of your elder brother, he'll be okay with you. But he's never really going to be proud of what you do. That would distort a kid drastically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what Christianity is. Christianity is, in the end, is an abusive relationship.
Yeah.
It's an abusive parental relationship, and that doesn't make any sense to follow.
All right, let's go on the home stretch here. A couple of things. How many years you been married?
I've been married for 16 years.
Okay. And in your bio, there was a period where you separated, and even now, she's remaining a Christian and you're not. How's that what's the dynamics there?
Sure. So we separated last year for about 6 or 7 months, and a lot of that had very little to do with religion and a lot more to do with just caustic relationships and things like that. There's a lot of things that went on that just made it problematic to stay married at the time. And I think the fact that my deconversion was happening alongside with my separation just made things all the more fun, trying to deal with all of that. And we got back together, I guess probably about a year ago now. And what's good about it is that because of all this occurring at the same time, it made us have to deal with these differences in a much more heightened way. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't something that could be buried under the rug. You couldn't say, well, I don't believe in God anymore. So what do you want to do about that? Because if you're married and you're not separated, well, then that becomes like, oh, holy crap. I mean, like, do we stay married? Do we get divorced because of religion? Well, that wasn't what caused it. So when we started going through things like marriage counseling, or even when we went all the way through the divorce proceedings in the sense of like separation, going before the court and all the paperwork and stuff like that, and that caused us to have to think a lot about, was it worth reconstituting the marriage again, even with the differences in our spiritual belief? Part of the benefit is that my wife is also a universal reconciliationist. She doesn't believe in hell. And so that makes it much easier because in the end, if I'm wrong, okay, I'll figure it out later on. It'll just be another one of those times where she can look at me and say, yep, I was right. So we're okay there.
Yeah, when you take away the high stakes, it does alleviate some of the pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And, she still goes to church on Sundays. She goes to 2 or 3 different churches. Both of my kids are involved in church, but I think they're more involved because of community. And I'm okay with that right now in the sense of, I think I was listening last night, and I can't remember who I was listening to. It was the most recent release, or the one before that, inoculating them, essentially.
Yeah. Oh, right. Right.
Because there's so, right now my oldest is in middle school, and we talk about this a lot more than my youngest, who's 10, who's kind of not quite ready to discuss the overarching of it. Like my oldest knows that I'm an atheist. We've had that conversation, and for her part, she's like, I enjoy going to church because of the people that are there. I believe there's probably a God, but most of the Old Testament, the idea that one guy and one girl created the world kind of seems stupid. So, my daughter has kind of my same wit when it comes to religion, and I love it. And they have a lot of different things. Whenever I was part of what I didn't include in this whole story was when I was in 11th grade, my parents divorced, and my mom moved in with her partner. So that threw a whole different kink into my own belief system.
Partner being another woman?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh.
So yeah, all of that is we're much more liberal in our thinking, partially because of that.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is that the Janet and Chad type of disdain for child indoctrination is when everybody in the family is indoctrinated.
Right.
They're all brainwashed, and that is the scary child abuse toxic environment. Your very existence or presence in the house as a known non-believer, skeptic, critical thinker is going to counterbalance any or the indoctrination that would otherwise be dangerous just by being there.
And we've had, the conversations that my wife and I have been things like, what are the things that I don't want them to be taught? So, for example, I do not want the idea of hell and damnation to become part of their general existence. And so, my youngest goes to a Baptist church for Awana because she has a friend that goes there. And I'm very careful to what they teach. I look at the verses they're memorizing and things like that. And if I come across something that's like, no, that's not right, I'm very careful to say, no, this is why they believe that, but this is the reason that they're wrong. Or the idea that they are less than, they are filthy rags, those type of things. I can't, original sin, all that stuff. I'm not, I kind of slowly knock the pegs out from underneath them as they get developed. Because, some of the ideas, the concepts of forgiveness and, grace and that type of stuff, I can buy into some of that.
Sure.
I can buy, I tell my kids when I was as a teacher, one of the things I try to practice is I don't hold things against them because they're kids. I have a robotics team and they do the dumbest things all the damn time. I'm a youth pastor. I just, I teach the religion of robotics. So they, but I have to be able to kind of get over that and move on from that. And so it's an interesting back and forth, I guess.
Yeah.
So one of the marital tensions that are a part of ex-Christianity, and it's true of my wife and I, like we started dating when she was 15 and I was 17. And we dated for 5 years and struggled to not have premarital sex. And we would fail every now and then and feel just utter shame and guilt and repent and then try to not. And then,
we both, I was at the Baptist, Baptist virginity, where everything but sex. So there's a lot of that stuff that would go on, but we never actually had intercourse until we got married.
Yeah.
And we're both virgins. And I will say this, it was the dumbest decision of my life.
Yeah.
Because you get married and then you go on the honeymoon and you expect everything to be like this glorious thing. Now that we've passed that thing, we've crossed over that line.
Right.
And it was some hard stuff. So, sorry, my wife just walked into the room as I'm talking.
Yeah.
And she's chuckling in the background.
Yeah. All right. So but
yeah.
There is that thing where, all right, so in the tension that, and I don't know how much you can say with her in the room, but there is the tension that you guys experienced that was obviously pretty strong enough to move out for a while. Was any of it looking back and going, we got married for the wrong reason?
Yes, that was part of it.
You got to rebuild the foundation, and that's tough.
Well, because, you get married because that's the thing that you do.
Yeah.
I mean, because of course, you get married to have sex. Let's be honest, that's part of it. And I'll be honest, even our pastor tried to say, you may want to hold this thing out. Our personalities are very, very different from one another. My wife and I. I am the ENFP.
Me too.
And she is the she varies between ISTJ and stuff like that. Yeah. So it's interesting. She's very organized and very businesslike, and I'm out there in space half the time. So
right. Well, and this is where the way you guys handle your differences could teeter. On one hand, we are incompatible. We got to go separate ways. On the other hand, you make me a better version of myself because of the well-roundedness that your counterbalance does for me. And I'm obviously in that sentence, I was trying desperately to avoid the word complementarianism or you complete me, because those phrases are codependent. But there is that thing where there's interdependence. And we both benefit from each other's differences. There's that. The
transition from codependency to interdependency, I think, has been our biggest struggle.
Me too. Huge.
And figuring that out. And one of the things that I've enjoyed kind of the experience of is the idea of agency, is the idea of marital agency. That when you're a Christian and you get married, what's supposed to be the case is you're married forever, bud. I mean, until you're dead. I don't care if you like it or not. That's what you're supposed to do. Yeah. Now, of course, it doesn't work in the Christian church that well either, but that's the mentality. And so I remember when we got married, that one of the things the pastor said, he put the ring on our finger and he said, this represents, the eternal ring. You're married basically until you die. And it's not supposed to be a shackle. It's not supposed to be a shackle that's holding you down. But in a lot of ways, because of the way it's presented, that's what it becomes.
Yeah.
Because no matter what, that's there. And so what we've had to transition to, and I don't actually wear a wedding ring anymore. And this is part of the reason, because of the symbolism that was attached to it back then for me.
Oh my gosh, that's interesting.
We choose, I choose every day to stay married. I choose. And it's a choice that we could change at any point in time. And it doesn't make us good people or bad people. It just makes us people.
Yep.
And so one of the things that the separation that I went through really showed me is, for a long time, I was convinced with marriage that when you got married, that, the door got shut. And then you chained the door together and you put bars and they welded it shut, and that's what it was.
Yeah.
Well, so you're walking together, and come hell or high water, that's what's going to happen. I don't care if you get along or you don't get along. If you're compatible or incompatible, that's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Once that changed, you recognize that the door is never really closed.
Yeah.
It's always right behind you. It's always open. And so you make that choice every day. You have your own agency within marriage to choose to continue to work together and to build a family and to work on a relationship, or to choose to walk away from it. And in some ways, that is so much more freeing to be involved in marriage.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
No, that's, and many have said that on the show. I think Shanna said that on her episode. But I read a book called Too Good to Leave, Too Bad to Stay.
Yep, I know that book.
Yeah, I can't remember the author. It's a female psychologist that had been doing it for 20 years. And what she says in the introduction is she is cautionary around the literal, what you said, I reevaluate my marriage every day. And I think instead of ball and chain or the ring on your finger and reevaluating each other every day, I wonder, number one, if there's a moderate place that's a little more in the middle, and secondly, my desire for that moderate place, is it still a remnant of my codependent self wanting that? And the reason I asked that is that I even said this to my wife about a month ago. I just said, but is it wrong or is it childish or immature for me to want there to be at least some element of security, as opposed to I'm judging you every day?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is kind of an interesting story for us. I would consider myself to be polyamorous in my thought process.
Right.
And I've mentioned this. We've had conversations, my wife and I, about it, and she's not.
Right.
She's very much monogamous. And so I'm a polyamorous, living a monogamous lifestyle because I choose to.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because she needs that security.
If you want her, that's the deal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because she needs that security of me being here, me being available, not looking elsewhere. For me, it's not a big issue. If she wanted to go and experience another relationship, if she's still here at the end of the day, I'm kind of like, okay, good, we're great.
Yeah.
And that's just different personality styles, I guess. I don't need that type of security. Now, I do like the idea of having someone here consistently.
Yeah.
Because there's something to be like when I was separated. The thing that I dealt with the most was I moved in with, this is strangely enough, I moved in with one of my former students and his dad. Like, he was like in his 20s by this point in time. I'd been a coach for a while. So, and I lived in this little one-room place because I needed a place to stay and didn't have the money to get anything else. And there was something kind of challenging about going to a place and having your one room and kind of being almost just literally by yourself.
Yeah. I think that we're
experiencing isolationism.
Yeah.
Sure.
We're pack animals, and we love company.
Mm-hmm.
I'm certainly a big advocate of occasional solitude that you reserve, for yourself and block out for yourself. But yeah, going home every night to an empty house or whatever, there's something daunting about that.
Yeah.
Especially for us extroverts. I mean, like, I get my energy from people.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we do.
I was out till 2 or 3 in the morning last night. I shouldn't have done that, but I was because I like hanging out with people a whole lot. That's what I do.
How about that?
Now, what is was your wife with you?
Oh, no. We have our times where we go do our own separate things. She has her trivia nights where she goes and plays trivia with her friends, and I have my going out to the bar with my friends' nights and staying out until whatever hours in the morning.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
For me, a lot of having space involves not worrying about schedule. And so if I want to go out and stay out till 11 or 12 or 1 or 2 for one night every now and again, that's okay.
Yeah.
For her, she can go out and go play trivia and then be back by a certain general time, and it's good.
Yeah. Did you find that one of the things that you kind of had to maybe move into or say to each other is that we don't own each other?
Yes. That's part of it. There's no ownership.
And I think within Christianity, there is a little bit of that.
Yeah. We never got into the whole patriarchal thing, really. I tried it once, the whole, the high priest household. Pants. Yeah, that didn't work very well for me. I don't know where I put those pants. They're gone.
Good riddance.
Yeah, good riddance. But they were gone even when we first got married. So she has a very strong personality. My wife is one of those people that she can do whatever she pretty much wants to. When she gets a job, she gets things done. That's just her personality style. She's very focused. Mm-hmm. And so trying that would never have worked. Though I will say there was some difficulty initially in marriage trying to negotiate that, because she initially wanted to be the idea of the good housewife. What are you supposed to be? Because, the youth pastor's wife was that one who was always by the pastor's side, and she kept the house and raised the kids.
Proverbs 31 woman, yeah.
Yes, Proverbs 31. I hate that. Because now, it's so sad. I have so many friends that are in the Christian circles, and I look at their lives pre-marriage, and they had all these visions and ideas of what they wanted to do with their lives. And this is women mostly. And I look at their lives post-marriage, and they force themselves, even if they don't realize it, they force themselves into this container of what a Proverbs 31 person is, and raising the kids and staying at home. And I have no problem with stay-at-home moms or people who want to homeschool that love doing that.
Yeah, as long as it's choose.
It has to be theirs. It has to be something they own because they want to. And there's so many people that seem like they don't do it because they want to. They've lessened, in a way, their dreams in order to be this person. And but I said I have plenty of friends who are definitely, they stay-at-home moms and they love it. And that's what they do with their lives. My sister's that way. I mean, she's a photographer who, stays home with her 4 kids. She just had another one. Holy moly. So, but she loves doing the homeschool stuff and everything like that. But there are other people that aren't that way. And I think my wife did that. She tried to mold herself into something she wasn't. And fortunately, her personality was much stronger than she thought it was. And she very quickly got back out in the workforce.
Yeah. Well, we know what you do separately. What do you guys do together?
We like to eat. Our budget, we try to stay within our limits budget-wise, but the thing that destroys us every month is the fact that we like to go out and eat at fast food restaurants, at restaurants. And so things that we'll do when my kids are in church on Wednesday nights, we'll go out and find a new restaurant, and we'll try something new.
You drop the kids off?
Yeah, because they both go to separate churches. One goes to the Baptist church, and one goes to a non-denominational church down the street. They chose the church they wanted to go to.
What about movies or Netflix binging or anything?
We've kind of worked into a pattern. We have our shows that we watch. We don't really agree on the same movies very often. I'm the fantasy sci-fi gamer person, and she's not. So
Ready Player One.
I haven't seen it yet, and I want to see it. She doesn't. Yeah. I want to see it. My daughter wants to see it. She's foaming at the mouth to go to them.
Yeah, it's a good one. I got to see it.
Well, the benefit of not going to church on Sunday mornings, by the way, is Sunday morning movie times are the cheapest
matinee
movie
prices.
Time. Yeah. That's kind of in my new church. I go worship at the theater. Yeah. And so those are the things that I like to watch. And but we have our series. The Grey's Anatomy, which I started watching back with her, and I don't know why I like it now, but it happened. CSIs, that whenever that was still a big thing, and the NCISs and those type of things, the serialized.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Shows that we watch. And that's a lot of our time spent is sitting on the couch watching TV together. We got back from a Disney trip over the last week, and we bought the deluxe meal plan because we tried every single place you possibly can eat. That's kind of what we do.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So,
Well, Daniel, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. You feel good about it?
Yeah, sure. And if y'all have any other questions, I'm available to talk forever. That's what I do.
Yeah.
All
right. Well, have a good weekend, and
you as well.
We wish you the best.
Yeah, it's terrific. Great meeting you, Daniel.
Thanks so much. You too.
Well, you know what I was thinking when you guys were talking about this ring and the ball and chain and all that? There's a song by the Indigo Girls called Power of Two, and there's a line in it that goes, "The steel bars of a promise suddenly bend with ease. The closer I am bound to you, the closer I am to free." So there's a different way of looking at the rings, But the promise that I make to you is steel bars, and yet by saying that, I'm free. If you find a person like that, and I think in Edie I found.
Yeah, you guys have that, and
yeah.
I believe in irony. Irony is almost a new god for me.
Yeah.
And when I find it like that, and you have that memorized.
Yeah. That line it was pretty powerful. Because there was a bunch of songs we had during our courtship, and one of them was "The Power of Two," and
that's really sweet. I'm gonna have to.
And we've been, of course we were married before, so we went through all the shit and the drama and the crap and the
you learned
money
how not
problems
to do it.
and stuff, and we dug ourselves some pretty deep holes because of that.
Yeah.
And now we don't want that.
Those are pitfalls that
no more drama
to avoid.
Yeah, no more of that. So it's much better.
Yeah.
If you find the right person.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think one of the reasons why Daniel's deconversion was not traumatic is that throughout, as devout as he was, as militant, marching through the halls of his high school.
Yeah, this guy. Still, I think he's got a little bit of a pugnacious sort of,
But in spite of all that devotion and that desire to please God, it seems like he kept a guard on his agency, his personal agency.
Yeah, he
never gave that up. And that's what and there at the end when he was talking about women who obligatorily give themselves over to whatever the Bible says they're supposed to be, that's giving up their agency, surrendering. Surrender's a big word in the Bible and in Christianity.
Right.
You're supposed to. Paul said, I love my chains.
Boy.
Serfdom is a virtue in this upside-down morality.
It is upside down.
In the Bible.
Wow.
But I'm just saying that it sounds like Daniel never gave that up, and I think that's one of the reasons why his deconversion wasn't painful.
Yeah, and I think, too, his, just hearing him talk, and it helps me understand Christianity better, because there is this sense, I think, that based on the sort of sketch that he drew, well, of course people have to behave that way. I mean, if you feel like you're being threatened all the time by the secular community, by secular beliefs and stuff, and you got to go over to the pole to, your flagpole to say a prayer and all that. I mean, you get like, you get very angry, and you want to, and that indicates why these people out there today are so crazy and angry.
Yeah.
Especially like the evangelicals. Like GodHatesFags.com, like Westboro Baptist, those guys.
Well, I would say even further that the reason why these Christians, evangelicals, get intense about it, or even a gesture like "let's meet at the pole," the real pressure they feel isn't so much from the secular community; it's from God Himself.
Okay.
And there's this desire where may the Lord shine His face upon you. The favor of God, the only source of goodness in the universe is God.
Right.
And if you want a happy, loving community, city, family, life.
Right. Country. Yeah, right.
Make America great again is all, at least the way the Christians interpret that phrase is, I think there's Psalms or scriptures that talk about a nation that fears the Lord will be blessed, will prosper.
Right.
And nations, for example, Sodom and Gomorrah, that forsook God got rained down with sulfur. So you have the judgment of God, and this is why some people said 9/11 was God. It was God's judgment because of abortion and homosexuality. And that's right out of their mouths. That's not me
I know.
projecting
You're making that up. I get
so
it.
they're literally, they know that judgment is coming if we offend God, and I mean offend. Like you hurt His feelings, you break His heart. He's got a plan for you to make you happy, and you're flipping the bird to God, and so He has no other recourse but to punish you because He chastises those He loves. And so the thumb, when I talk about the thumb in your back, you want God to be God of X, we just listed all the different social constructs, in order for goodness to reign.
Wow.
So there's your compulsion to be an asshole.
So it's not necessarily the secular push, but it's God Himself.
It's God Himself.
Yeah.
And then when they see the secular push, like the homosexual agenda, air quotes.
Yeah, right.
When you see the secular push, It makes you put your dukes up, because the more that agenda advances, it's like a dark cloud coming over the earth.
Can't you see that you're harming yourself? You're harming us. Yeah. That kind of stuff.
You're harming us because God willed it, and all the commands of God in the Bible are for our benefit. That's what they tell themselves. So not only are you hurting yourselves, you homosexuals, but you're offending a holy God who will not tolerate it.
Wow.
And thank God that he won't, because if he turns us over to our own debauchery, that's the worst thing, is when God says, I'm done with you. And that's what he did. That's what he did with the flood.
Yeah, I wish he would.
I wish they'd be done with him.
That's right. That's right.
Their imaginary friend. All right, so...
Oh, man. Interesting stuff, though.
I would say that maybe Daniel wins the fastest talker award of any guest on the show. Coming up on 200 episodes. Maybe this might even be the 200th. I don't know.
I'm not counting anymore.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, he was excellent, and a lot of food for thought here, a lot of stuff to think about in the big picture and the small picture. And that's the good thing about some of these guests. They shine light on a much larger area than we ever think.
Well, and I'm glad you said that, because by larger, what I think of and what I was thinking of the whole time is I could look at my life. Yeah. And I was a youth pastor. I too marched the halls of my school in prayer language, laying hands on lockers.
Laying hands on lockers?
Yeah, praying for specific people. Praying for the principal, praying for leadership.
Wow, I didn't.
The reason that Christians pray for Trump is that's a biblical mandate to pray for leaders and such. So anyway, I did all of that. I became a charismatic cult leader in a Christian rallied. Hundreds of people rallied around me. Ended up splitting a church because my youth group was growing faster than the adult church. He called it the front church and the back church. That's right. I mean, element after element of his story is verbatim my story.
Plays the drums too, like you.
Yeah, plays the drums. There's tons of things here. Yeah. So if I didn't know better, and of course his story is helping me know better. If I didn't know better, I would think that my experience was unique, because it's just so weird that this happened. But the sad thing is it's not unique. It's almost common in every church, as far as the more radical a church gets, the more devout, the more intense they are, the more apt they are to split at the seams. And it happens over and over and again every day in on the churches in every corner of this country. And it's tragic. Now, the churches that are just like been there for 100 years and they're cool are the Episcopals that don't get wrapped up in things that aren't worth wrapped up in, you know. The more literal you take the scriptures, well, it's just there's no flexibility, there's no elasticity. It's rigid, and so guess what? It breaks.
Yeah, it's like Spong. It goes back to John Shelby Spong: change or die.
Yeah,
Christianity must just change or die.
Yeah.
That's what he said.
Well, so we could hope that they stay rigid and thus die.
Well, if it keeps up, it just might happen the way millennials are moving away from some of this crazy shit, because they have friends that are homosexuals and they like them, and there's nothing wrong with them, you know, that kind of stuff, and just the nutty belief system.
And the nuttier they get, the more backpedaling sane people are going to do.
Yeah.
They're going to look at the Trump evangelical followers and say, not my peeps.
Yeah.
Not my peeps.
Can't do it. Yeah.
This is
unacceptable.
You guys can walk yourselves off the goddamn cliff because I'm not following you.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what we need. People with agency, people with morals.
Yeah. Critical thinkers. Just think it through a little bit.
Think it through.
You know,
why can't people be like us?
Exactly. Then we wouldn't have a show.
Yeah. No. Okay.
All right.
Talk to you later.
All right. Thanks, Cass. Great show.